I had the opportunity of working with a group of executive directors from nonprofit organizations in Silicon Valley, all of them leaders of color in our region. I would say that a third of them were immigrants. When it was time for me to do site visits, I scheduled 45 minutes. That's reasonable, right? I used to do the site visits and had a questionnaire, a set of questions I needed to explore with them about the work that they were doing. And I was listening most of the time, but they went on not to respond to the questions that I had, but to tell me the story of the work that they had done. They were not reporting to someone that was monitoring. They were sharing the values on which they had built the organizations that they were leading. They were sharing the pain and the aspirations of the people that they were working with. That was more valuable to them. So my 45 minutes became an hour and a half, and in some cases, 2 hours if there was food involved. And there was always food involved. So then I had to go back to the foundation and rationalize the reason, why were you there for 2 hours? Right? And explain the value of storytelling as a tool through which nonprofit leaders, those that I was working with, were sharing the progress of their work, the impact that they had had on the families that they work with. So, yes, it takes a long time, and sometimes it's the only thing that people will bring to you. They're not going to bring information. You have to find the information. What they will bring to you is a story. But we have this tendency of creating tension between the task, the data that we must collect. How many of you have to collect data for them funders? And the relational aspect of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. We work with the head, and that's where we need to get those numbers. But we're working with people who are moved by the heart. And it's not that one is best than the other. It's the tension. And part of our job then is to figure out how we hold that tension. And I think that the conversation today reminds me, preparing for the conversation today, reminded me of that tension. So it is with that that I also want to acknowledge that in the absence of our friend who happens to be in Cuba, we'll remember her while she's having a great time and we're here having great coffee and having a great conversation by acknowledging the diversity that exists in this room, the diversity of languages, the diversity of nationalities that are represented. We are part of one of the most diverse communities in the nation. And I think it is important for us to take that into consideration when we're talking about families and when we are engaged with them in conversations where their stories surface. That diversity is going to color the relationship that we have with them. So, how many of you are able to see yourself reflected in the words that are projected? Raise your hands. Okay. And if you're not raising your hand, tell me which word could be added. And what would be the origin of that word? Burmese. Okay. So there's always room for innovation, for expansion of our understanding of one another. Thank you. Say it again. And what's the origin of the word? Okay. Right. So the question is not often, I heard her. It's not often, but thank you, thank you. See, collaboration. You're ready to help me. So I think it is important for us to figure out, so who else, right? And sometimes when we begin to define community, it's based on who we like, who I feel comfortable with, who gave me the warmest hug. But it should be about everyone, including Michelle, who wanted to add something.
No, that was That's what you ignored.
Shanice, what? It's cool. That's the word.
Oh, I would say what's up. Like for those families where I grew up, where there wasn't a second language, but there was definitely subcultures within the Black culture and just how we use our language.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, brother. I was thinking of Cubo. 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 So can you explain?
It's more of a intimate with your close friends. Instead of saying hola, Cubo is like saying, it's like what's up? It's like what's up.
Anyone else? Okay. So thank you. Please don't think I'm rude. We'll get to work at your tables. I'm going to introduce myself beyond what was already offered throughout the conversation, kind of sharing with you things that I feel are significant for others to know about me, okay? And I will do it trusting everyone that's here. I know some of you know part of my story, and some of you might know just my name. And that's totally okay. So I'm going to use myself as a way of facilitating the reflection, my own story, rather than using someone else's story. I think it is important for us, and this comes from my learning of Paulo Freire's work. Carlos and I went to high school together and had the opportunity at a very early age as teenagers to work with Paulo Freire in the Mission District. And he used to say, if you're going to ask someone their story, you need to be ready to share yours. So don't talk with someone else's story in your lips, your mouth. Talk with your own story. Okay? So I'm going to use my brother's Fred's teaching as a way of facilitating the conversation. How many of you know Francisco X. Alarcón? Okay, some of you do. And now all of you are going to know. So this is a very, very simple poem. He used to work on trying to simplify language as a way of communicating powerful ideas. I hope I have enough for everyone. I just wanted to underline the fact the idea of the network is very valuable. It's also very human. I remember my daughter as a child, the first thing that she wanted to do when we went to a park was to go to someone else. And if there was a child, she wanted to go and not just see them, touch them. And of course, you know, my upbringing was maleducada, no hagas eso. You know? So I had to unlearn and reimagine the values so that I could celebrate her desire to touch someone else. And I think that often our families are only interested in that basic connection. And Brother Francisco X. Alarcón captured it very well in that poem. Can someone help me share his words? Go for it.
We are trees. Our roots network with the roots of other trees. Our branches grow with desire of touching other branches. Somos árboles. Nuestras raíces se entrelazan con las raíces de otros árboles. Nuestras ramas crecen con el deseo de tocar otras ramas.
Thank you. So if you can keep that image, that is the potential of the network. And that is the potential of the relationships that are established with the families that we work with. It's not a revolutionary concept. What's revolutionary is what we do to make that concept a reality. I was at a meeting with civic engagement professionals. This is a family engagement professionals morning. And in the civic engagement professionals gathering, a lady, when asked about innovations in civic engagement, stood out and said, we need to do the most significant innovative thing that we can think of today. Get out of your house and have a conversation with the person in the house next to you. That's the most innovative thing that we can do today. Put your cell phone away. I asked you to do the opposite, but what she was saying was that we believe that social media is going to resolve our aspirations of connecting with others. It says you cannot substitute the connection that you can make with someone else. Cara a cara, face to face, through a handshake. So, again, I think it is important for us to take into consideration the values of the poem and the values of the work that you are doing, and ask yourself, ¿para qué? What for? And we'll come back to that. So there are a lot of folks that are in the room with whom I have worked, who have offered inspiration, who have pushed me in all kinds of ways. So I might be putting them on the spot. I'm just warning you, I might. But for now, let me give you some information about myself. So this will be the transactional part of the conversation, kind of shifting gears continuously. Some of you might recognize what that screenshot is of, but it's an intake form. How many of you have to do intake forms? Okay. Sometimes family engagement is defined as the management of the process of doing the intake form. Yeah, what do you do? I'm a family engagement specialist. Oh, what's that? I do intake forms. Okay? So the way in which we connect with families is to manage the acquisition of their information on behalf of the organizations that we're a part of. And that's how the systems are set up. For us, it is important, it is valuable to capture that information. So we do it in a very transactional way. It feels like an interview. So I'll share that information. Who are you? Mauricio Palma. What are you? She said it. I'm an immigrant. When did you get here? Summer 1978. September 22nd. How did you get here? There used to be a thing called Pan Am. I flew here. Where did you go to school? Bears in the room? Bears in the room? Okay. I went to Mission High School. All right? But that's not my story. How many families do you know? Well, I process 100 intake forms a week, so imagine that. How many weeks do I, and we go forward from there. We don't know families if all we do is to do the intake form. We know that, right? So the fact that you know that I went to Mission High doesn't tell you anything about me. It doesn't tell you that Carlitos and I went to Upward Bound. That Carlitos used to have a black book. And he was famous for the black book. Okay? And he never shared the secret. He never shared the blessings that came from the black book. Okay? But the idea was you needed to try to get into Carlitos' black book. The in crowd was in Carlitos' black book. Me going to Mission High School, you wouldn't know about that, right? It's not my story. So let me go from the transactional to the relational. And this is the tension again. So how might you use the opportunity to do the intake form? How might you use that connection that you already have to make it relational? So yes, I am an immigrant from Nicaragua, and the reason why we came to the United States, why we came here, was because there was a war in Nicaragua. My father was being persecuted, and being a student in Nicaragua was not safe. So my mom and dad, who were already separate, as a consequence of the fact that my father was fighting against the dictatorship and my mom's family was in favor of the dictatorship, they came together and decided it was best for the kids to leave the country. And we got to San Francisco and we were handed to our relatives. I went with one, my sister went with another, and my brother with another. That was the end of my family, but it was actually the beginning of family for me in a different way. It was the beginning because it helped me understand that some relationships are fluid, some relationships are not. And it gave me the capacity of accepting and embracing the fluidity that comes from relationships that I can help shape. So when I say brother to Carlos, I'm not saying, whoa, what's up, brother? Or I'm not saying with my crucifix hanging out, brother. I'm saying brother because he was my brother. You understand what I'm saying? You make family. You transform it. You reimagine it continuously. So sometimes the intake form is not going to embrace or appreciate the fluidity that comes with family. We're asking people, okay, wait a minute, just answer my question, please. Because I only have space for, this little sentence, okay? So we're continuously pushing against the bursting out of the story that people carry with them. And we're continuously trying to box family into certain type of conditions and images. And it's continuously trying to burst out from those spaces. So that's the relational part of who I am. And now, Brother Borak is going to ask you to help us have a conversation. So it is your turn. Okay, you ready? And we're going to do a little bit of transactional and a little bit of relational stuff. So on your table, you'll find a book. Please don't walk away with it. My library account is clean. And I want to keep it that way. So these are all books that were provided by the San Mateo County Library System. And we don't want to hinder that partnership that we have with them. So I would like to ask you to please, in the spirit of sharing basic information, to just say your name and the name of the organization that you're a part of. If you want to talk more about the organization, you can do that later. We're going to do that later. When Michelle, Carlita, and Suri asked me to come, they gave me a list that was like, it never ended, of rules that I had to follow. And one of the rules was that I needed to ensure that you had conversations at your table. And that you had to have that conversation early on during the morning and at the end of the morning as well. So I'm just letting you know, it might be uncomfortable for some of you to have a conversation. If you feel upset about it, it was not me who determined that you needed to have a conversation. Some of you came to listen. I'm with you. You came to be comfortable, drink your coffee or your chocolate. But they asked me, you needed to be in conversation with one another. After all, this is part of the purpose of this process. So can you please identify a person to read the book? And then the last step is to have a conversation, a brief conversation about a character that you identified with, okay? Some of the characters might be the ocean, or a character might be the wall. So don't limit your imagination to think that a character needs to be someone that sounds and looks like you. So, and then we'll come back. Now, I saw a maraca that someone had, but I have a... So it's your choice, maraca or bell. All right, so we're gonna do both. But go ahead and take a minute to share your name and the organization, and then have a conversation about the book. Okay. A couple of my colleagues, coworkers, are here today, and it's always great to get their support. So it's interesting because I was thinking, Gina and I started out in relationship working in the fields a long time ago, and there are three women that I feel are critical in kind of my journey to this morning. And I was trying to figure out who might know all three. And there are quite a few of you who know all three. So the first that comes to mind is Val Goins. She was the one that hired me to work at the Child Care Coordinating Council. Okay. There's a story there. The next person is Mary Peche, who helped elevate the council from a very small concept and idea to a powerhouse that had the possibility and took it and ran with it of creating a table for families in San Mateo County, a place from where advocacy on behalf of children in our region could be envisioned and got accomplished. And then the last person is Ethel Siderman, who helped not only take the idea of this tension of, transaction and relationship in her own center in Fairfax, San Anselmo, in Marin, but create a national organization around concept of family engagement. And it was, and it is the connection of those three women that in some ways helped shape my journey. So in honor of them, all of whom have already left us, they introduced me to this literature. And it was funny because Mary will mention one of the books, Ethel will mention another book, and Val might mention another book at some point. And I had the opportunity of working with Ethel for close to 8 years. And she carried these books with her throughout the country. And she used them as a way of reflecting on the fact that families come in all shapes and forms, that families might be completely different from who we are. So how do we begin to connect with them? So the last question has a lot to do with that desire to reach out across the table and connect with someone else who might be a crocodile, and I'm not a crocodile, who might be a mice, and I am not. So might be a monkey, and I'm no monkey, or might be swimming in the ocean, but I'm afraid of swimming. So how can I connect? So I'm curious, how were you able to connect? Any thoughts or reactions from the reading that you did that you want to share? Come on.
So the actions of the animal, we see from the monkey, the desire of teach and help the other people. So you can identify with that feeling of the emotional reaction.
Okay, so I want you to underline that. The emotion of the animal is what I can identify with. Okay? Capture that. Because at the heart of storytelling is not a list of facts. A story is a cradle of emotions that allow us to connect. They inspire us. They move us. And it's not because 1 out of 3 in San Mateo County is an immigrant. It's because you heard the story of an immigrant that moves you to want to do something about immigration. You understand what I'm saying? The number it comes and goes, but the story moves us. So it's the emotion of the story of the monkey and the crocodile that moves us. And Leone was sharp. The brother knew how to tell the story that was going to move us. Okay, thank you.
So we had Tilly and the wall, and we all have a wall, personal obstacle that stops us. And I personally had a long journey with my personal obstacle, and I remember saying this, really staying up and I saying, what can I do to change it? What can I do to change society, change myself, change those around me? And at the end of the day, I finally realized it's me. I have to change. If I don't change, then everyone else around me won't see the change. And at the end of the day, it helps me out, and then everyone else can see why the change is so useful and needed. So Sorry, I'm all wired up. 2 cups of coffee. It's not my personal I love coffee.
It's your network. You get to talk.
I haven't tried this coffee here, but I'm looking forward to it. Right?
Oh, it's to go. Smart.
Yeah, I know, I heard it, so I thought, pretty cool guy today. But yeah, I see it in a way where we all have our personal obstacles, and it sometimes can really hurt us emotionally, physically, mentally. And until we are able to break those walls, we see clarity, we see the unknown.
Who helped make the transformation a reality? You remember in the story? What was it? Who? What animal? It was a worm. It was a little worm that knew where the hole was through which you can not go over the wall, not break the wall, but go underneath to the other side. Now, a worm, I just want to step on it. You know what I mean? But the worm in this case was the light. So, do we want to be a worm? I want to be a worm in my relationship with families. I'm not going to break the wall for them. I am not going to jump the wall for them, but I can be the worm. Just a little bit of light. But they have to do the rest of the work, just like you said in your story. So I want to be a worm. And it was Leonie who helped me figure out that I could be a worm rather than a wall to families. Okay. Someone else? Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more. Come on, please. Please go for it.
Something that stood out for me when we were sharing our character is that most of the people at the table choose one character, but they see it from a different perspective. They identify with that character from a different reason. And that's how we interact with the families. We all have our own connection with them, our relationship with them, and we see some aspects that maybe someone else who's working with the same family doesn't see it. And that's the beauty of our work with them.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Go for it.
For me, it wasn't so much a character in the book, but the way in which the story brought all of us at this table into the same place and held us in. Like I could, like we're all like, what's going to happen? Like, pulled in by curiosity, and so it was a way to come together around a thing in a way that we might not have had we not had the story to hear.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that. I feel that it is important for us to then remember that when we are connecting with that family, we have the possibility of connecting with a story. A story that can give greater value and meaning and transformative light to our own work. It can serve as a focus for us. I want you to know, though, that the tension that exists sometimes with family is one that leads to agony on the part of families. So can we facilitate the unveiling of the stories of the families that we work with for their transformation? It's not about therapy. It's about action, their action. I'm not a therapist, but I want to be a worm. So how can we elevate the stories of the families that we're working with? In doing so, if we read these quotes, we are giving life. We're helping facilitate the reimagining of one's life when story comes out, when those emotions are shared. Imagine if policymakers, in addition to the numbers that we have to generate for them, heard the stories of the families that we work with. Those families move you. They give purpose to your work. They give a sense of accomplishment that does not come necessarily from the numbers in isolation. So how can you use the power of the stories of the families to make an impact in the policies within our ecosystem and beyond? To attract new relationships. It's all right there. And you said it. It can bring us together to focus on what's important, on what matters most. So how do we unleash the power of the stories of the families? What value might we give it in the context of our work? What spaces before or after the intake form can we create for the stories to come out? For us to end the agony. So with that in mind, this is not how do we build stories, but I wanted to give you a sense of what are some of the elements and why people use stories as a way of helping you remember all of that and then put it into perspective to lead the conversation that you're going to have in a few minutes. So why? We've already begun to talk about that. Why? And there is a healing component, and some of you talked about that already. They help us learn enough about one another that lead us to greater understanding. We might be at two different plates of the line that has already been created. You might be the other in the us and them tension. And the story can help us erase the line a little bit. Back to your statement. It gives us focus. It allows us to create an idea of how we can move together. So what is the narrative that you're going to create for Friday Cafe? What's going to be the emotion that's going to surface out of this work to inspire you to continue doing this work beyond the term of the grants, which, as I understand it, ends in 2 years? Or is this just a exercise connected to a grant? Is there a real desire to find common ground and purpose to continue this effort? Because if there is, the grant will come and go, and you will continue. You will sustain it. You will find the warmth. And part of what we need to do is inspire others to come to the table, to come to the conversation, to invest in family engagement professionals, to have the time and the space necessary in order to continue growing. Your work is critical. It's incredibly valuable to our families and to our communities. So how do we inspire others from this platform to be engaged? So it's not only about engaging the families, it's also about engaging the larger community that we're a part of. So those are 3 ways in which stories can be utilized, and everyone here does this in one way or another. I'm just giving terminology to what we already do, and terminology that some of you might already know. So what are some key elements? I'm going to go through this really quickly because I want you to get to the conversation. There's always passion in a story, but I'm not talking about the kissy-kissy kind of passion. Okay? The uncomfortable hugging kind of passion. Or the comfortable, depending. I'm talking about the kind of passion that leads others to action beyond myself. There is always a protagonist, and I'm not talking about the Amazonian leader who transforms her own life by using her power for good. I'm not talking about that unreachable character. I'm talking about someone like you and I who sees a need in the community and decides to take action. That's the protagonist. You are the protagonist. You are the protagonist to yourself, in your community, in the life of families that you're working with. You're a partner. But they're the protagonist. And stories always have a scary character. I don't know why more and more kids in my daughter's school think that it's cool to be scary. Okay, and they're about to go to high school, and I'm scared. But the antagonist, which often we equate with that scary character, might not necessarily be the antagonist for someone else. So, and the protagonist, that parent who's always asking questions, might at times be perceived and embraced and treated like the antagonist. So remember, it's all about where you're sitting in the story. Is the story happening to you, or are you making the story happen? And what's the relationship between that tension? But assuming that someone else is the antagonist, I'm not talking about someone that looks like that, but I'm talking about obstacles that are real, that are tangible, that get in the way of our work and families' lives. Something that's very concrete that I can do something about. Potholes. Very concrete. You know where they are, but you always drive by it and you don't do anything about it. We just complain about it. We don't even call the radio station anymore because they don't have that place at the radio station where you could call and let them know that, you know what, there is something wrong in my city. Can you please figure out how to go and talk to the mayor, whoever? The good thing is that here in Colma, Michelle is in with the mayor. So if there is a pothole, maybe she won't be able to facilitate the process of fixing it. But in most cases, we don't have those relationships, right? That can help us address, in this case, the antagonist in the story being the pothole. Okay? So passion, protagonist, antagonist, things that are traditionally found in stories, okay? But there is something else. You remember this, Carlos? Valencia Street. When I came to the US, that's what it looked like, okay? So there is transformation. There is transition. There is that takes us from the challenge to a resolution. I get lost on Valencia Street nowadays. It's like, I don't know what it is, but, it looks nice, but I get lost. Okay? If I don't have a bike, I get lost. Because my car is no longer welcome in the neighborhood. There was a lot of work that went from this Valencia, where people realized that we needed to do something in order to make it so that all means of transportations can be used in the street. And after reimagining the street, bike lanes were created. Okay? Ay, madre. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. The Community Foundation is trying to figure out what are some of the ways in which we can use storytelling as a way of bringing about change. And this is something that we've been doing from the beginning, over the past 10 years. And I want to share some of those ways. But when we imagine the Silicon Valley story, this is something that I've been playing with. How can we elevate the stories of Silicon Valley? Okay? So when I say this, these are the images that come to people's minds. The stories of Silicon Valley. Because those are the stories that are elevated. Those are the stories that are present in the news. The media is all over those stories. We recognize them. Our kids know them by name, like if they were their neighbors or their family members. So we began to experiment. What happens if we bring the stories that we are not hearing and move them forward? Anita Rees reimagined what Pacifica Resource Center could be for its community. She transformed it from an organization that didn't even have a nonprofit status for 40 years to an organization that right now is addressing homelessness in Pacifica, and it has the independence of its own nonprofit status. How many of you have heard of her and her story? Very few, right? Is her face recognizable in our community? And the kind of work that she does, is it welcomed? Not by everyone. So even though in this room she is a protagonist, to many, she is an antagonist. The kind of transformation that she wants for her community is not always applauded. Same way, Sarah Bilu. When the first executive order limiting travel from 7 predominantly Muslim countries was signed, she was at the airport providing legal support to Muslim families that were trying to get out of the airport. They had already traveled. How many of you have heard of Sarah Bilu? Okay. Very few of us. Again, she is a protagonist that in the eyes of many is an antagonist. We got a call at the Community Foundation. Why are you supporting Sarah Bilu? Okay? And that's the climate within which we live today. Cherise Domingo uses the power of the video and the story of incarcerated youth to provide an extra set of evidence for their case when they go to the judge. And they have been successful in increasing the number of those youth to come out of the juvenile system, that others are now replicating the model that they have created. So using stories for what? What's the purpose? Give life to people, literally. Transform people's lives, literally. Marshall Gans tells us that in order for stories to be effective, this is something that I'm revisiting. I also had an opportunity of working with the Industrial Areas Foundation, doing some organizing 15 years or so ago when I was working for the Parent Services Project. And what he says is that you need to anchor stories in the continuum of strategy that leads to action. So what do you want to do with the stories? We're working on answering that question through the development of a regional media collaborative to elevate the stories that are not being told and to address some of the challenges that our families are facing in our region. And November 15th, all of you are going to be invited. We're going to have on-the-table conversations an entire day to elevate the stories of folks in Silicon Valley who are interested and inspired to see changes in their communities. It's going to be a day-long event, And every community, whoever wants to, can invite their friends, or they can invite the crocodiles, the monkeys, and the worms in their community, the people that they do not associate with, to cafecito. How often do we give ourselves the opportunity of having a conversation with the crocodiles, the monkeys, and the worms in our community? If you're little blue, how often do you get to play with little yellow in our community? So we're going to create the space for you to live the stories that you read this morning, November 15th, and we'll tell you more about it. Those of you that are interested in looking at how institutions that are providing support to families have used the power of the story to transform their programs, I invite you to take a look at what Head Start is doing nationally. I don't know how many Head Start folks are in the room today, but there is an entire page dedicated for us to reflect on the power of stories to transform the intake process, to reimagine what programs can do when they connect with families. And I have a sheet of paper with all the contact information for you to go and check it out on your own. But for now, I want to ask you to please have a conversation and imagine what can you do with the power of the stories of the families that you work with? And what can you do to advance your family engagement strategy? Now, these questions, I offer them to you as a launching pad, but you might have your own questions. I just didn't have the time to capture your questions. So I offer this as a launching pad for your conversation. So choose one of those questions, if you like, or come up with a question of your own. So I want to respect our time together and want to say goodbye by sharing this quote. In many ways, your work is about transforming our communities. Sometimes we think that transformation comes with a massive policy change that transform the way in which we access resources. Your work is transforming our communities. And I hope you don't minimize it, but do the opposite. The question is, how do we then take the stories that families give to us to let the world know how much transformation is taking place every day with the work that you're facilitating? Don't let those stories be silenced. You can be a conduit through which those stories are shared with others. The untold stories of our families have the power to transform our community. There is fake news. We've heard a great deal about that, but there is the story of every family that we work with as a tool to combat fake news, as a way of putting a face and a heart to the work that we do, which is not fake at all. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.